While we don't always notice it, we are surrounded by beauty. The colors, forms, and symmetry that we see all around us, whether in nature, in other creatures, or in human-made creations like art and architecture, inspire us, give us pleasure, and make life worth living. We don't always agree on what's visually pleasing, but we all agree that a world without beauty is not a world we would enjoy living in. Professionally, while the creative arts aren't as well respected and remunerated as fields like professional sports and business, as a society, we do show our appreciation for art and beauty through teaching it in schools, celebrating artistic achievements, and encouraging artistic innovation and creativity. Through time, humans have also recognized that art and beauty have a greater significance than simply being visually pleasing to behold. For example, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato, living in the 4th century before the Common Era, taught his students that the contemplation of beauty causes the soul to grow wings. Plato also taught that the good is the beautiful. People of faith have understood Plato's teachings on aesthetics since the beginning. It's for that reason that all religions, ancient and modern, have used art to inspire its devotees. And as the 20th century Universalist minister Kenneth Patton wrote, houses of worship are for the ingathering of nature and human nature. It is a house of art, adorning its celebrations with melodies and handiworks. This is as true for faiths that allow pictorial representations of the divine, as well as those like ours, which tend to be iconoclastic. In Western civilization, one of the defining features of modern art is that it tends not to be inspired by religious themes. Medieval and Renaissance artists are mostly known for their paintings, mosaics, and sculptures of Christian figures, which is understandable since the churches were the main patrons of the arts. While houses of worship are still one of the greatest patrons of the arts, especially music, art today tends to focus its attention on the human form, nature, and abstract concepts. Nevertheless, whether intentionally or not, contemporary art offers us an opportunity to allow our souls to grow wings, as Plato suggested. And in today's sermon, I'd like to share with you the inspiring art of a contemporary artist, the American photographer, film director, and music video director, David LaChapelle. In case you're not familiar with this artist, David LaChapelle was born in Hartford, Connecticut in 1963. His mother was a refugee from what was then known as the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic. He attended high school at the North Carolina School of the Arts, though when he was 15 years old, he ran away to New York City because he was bullied at school for his sexual orientation. During that time, he worked as a busboy at the famous Studio 54 nightclub. He did eventually return to school in North Carolina, though, where he focused on learning about painting, though he also began to experiment with the medium of photography. He developed a unique analog technique of hand painting his own negatives in order to achieve an elevated spectrum of color before processing his film. At age 17, LaChapelle moved back to New York City. Following his first photography show at the 303 Gallery in Chelsea, he was hired by Andy Warhol to work at Interview magazine. Through his mastery of color, unique composition, and imaginative narratives, LaChapelle began to expand the vernacular of photography. His staged tableau, portrait, and still life works challenged devices of traditional photography, and his work quickly gained domestic and international interest. In the decades since, LaChapelle has become one of the most published photographers throughout the world, having published several anthologies of art books. Concurrently, his work has also expanded into other genres. He directed music videos for artists like Moby, Christina Aguilera, Jennifer Lopez, Whitney Houston, Britney Spears, Mariah Carey, and others. His 2005 feature film Rise, about dancing subcultures, was released theatrically in 17 countries. Many of his still and film works have become iconic archetypes of America in the 21st century. His photographic style has been described as hyper-real and slyly subversive, as well as kitsch pop surrealism. In the past 3 decades, he has exhibited internationally in galleries and museums in the United States, Great Britain, France, the Netherlands, Israel, and Italy, and he's been the recipient of many awards. Earlier this year, the Fotografiska Museum on Manhattan's East Side featured 150 photographs of LaChapelle in a solo exhibition called Make Believe, which focused on the themes of fame, faith, and the future. I was able to attend that show, and we're going to look at some of those photographs together shortly. But first, I'd like to share a portion of the artist's statement to give you an idea of his own sense of his work. Quote, "With freedom comes responsibility. My earliest works from the 1980s were motivated by a search to represent a loving God, the nature of the soul and heaven during a devastating period when I lost many friends. My profession led to working in popular culture and secular themes. Over time, I began to notice how my faith in God was keeping me grounded through my personal struggles. And meanwhile, the world of popular culture was turning away from religion and focusing more on fame, wealth, and individualism. It became apparent to me that I could not separate my personal life and professional work. I feel the responsibility to bring light into the world and make imagery that can elevate and serve humanity, even while sometimes employing drama and humor. Whether secular or religious, my images are part of the same experience and evolving perspective. In the last 20 years, I've had the opportunity to show my work and find inspiration in Europe, especially Italy. In Italy, the secular world coexists with the religious, and walking through streets of the old world is a great analogy to me of how art, faith, and everyday life can be in harmony." End quote. So, without further ado, let's look at some photographs. Ken, you can put the first photograph up. For men will be lovers of self. This photo is titled "For Men Will Be Lovers of Self," taken in 2021. The photo was inspired by a passage from the New Testament's second epistle of Timothy, whose 2nd century author was concerned about the condition of humanity during the end of time and wrote, quote, "For people will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unfeeling, implacable, slanderers, without self-control, brutes, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, swollen with conceit. Keep away from such people." LaChapelle thought of this verse in relation to the rise of taking selfies, in which the camera is turned inward, not out of introspection, but out of conceit and vanity. He noticed too how selfies became performative, as when he'd pass by someone taking a selfie who appears happy while taking the photo, but who shows signs of sadness when the camera is put away. He said in an interview, quote, "In my father's generation, men weren't lovers of self. There wasn't that self-obsession with our physicality that we see today," end quote. So in this photo, we see a nude male model sitting with his arms around his legs and his head buried in his lap, with tears falling from his eyes. He holds his cell phone in his hand with a cockeyed image of himself on the screen. Behind him is a mirror in the shape of a half shell, which evokes Botticelli's famous painting of the birth of Venus. Except in this photo, the subject sadly retreats into himself instead of blissfully arriving on the scallop shell's edge. So now we'll move on to the next photo, which is Deluge. Thank you. So this photograph is titled Deluge, which was made in 2006. This was one of the artist's first large format works, which was inspired by a state of deep reflection after he relocated from Los Angeles to Hawaii. The photo is based on the Great Flood referenced in the book of Genesis, as well as Michelangelo's version of it, which is painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. You can see how this version is set in a submerged Las Vegas, the city of sin, and features a sinking car, a collapsing telephone pole, and a crumbling Caesar's palace. The artist has said that the idea behind this photo is that life is in some sense eminently coming to an end, but you're there helping one another amidst the chaos, which is the artist's way of trying to show human nature at its highest. When children learn about this story of the Great Flood and Noah's Ark, we emphasize to them the pairs of animals and the rainbow that emerges at the end of the flood. But this photo evokes the chaotic terror of being drowned in water. While religious fundamentalists in every generation proclaim that this generation specifically is living in the end times, and while the tenor of some environmentalists strike the same apocalyptic chord, LaChapelle reminds us that even in the midst of chaos, humans are ready to reach out to one another, to support one another, and to be part of the solution. We'll now move on to the following photograph, which is Gas Shell. So speaking of environmental concerns, the following photo we'll discuss is from 2012 and is titled Gas Shell. It depicts a time in the future when nature has reclaimed the earth. At this unspecified time in the future, gas stations will have become archaeological discoveries, overgrown with jungle life. You can see how the rainforest acts as a kind of organic biological force, which is simultaneously both beautiful and destructive. Nature is the source of fossil fuels, and nature also has the power to re-immerse these human-made synthetic creations. Next, we're going to move on to the following photo, which is from the series, Jesus is My Homeboy. Why don't you highlight, I'll tell you in a moment. Let's do the one, yes, there we go. Thank you, Ken. So we're now going to see a series of photos from a series LaChapelle made in 2003 titled Jesus is My Homeboy. This was one of the last editorial assignments the artist did before returning to a focus on gallery work. The artist noted that editors would usually allow him to do whatever he wanted as long as he incorporated the required fashion pieces that the magazine was trying to promote. LaChapelle said that whether making an image for a commission or a personal idea, it had always been essential to him to communicate a clear story. No matter how banal the opportunity might be, the fun of making images came from working creatively within boundaries. This series was originally shot for ID Magazine, a British bi-monthly publication that focuses on fashion, music, art, and youth culture. LaChapelle didn't think the editors were expecting the story of the photos to center around Jesus of Nazareth, but the quality of the photos certainly won them over. The artist questioned what the second coming would look like if it were to happen. And that question came to him when he saw someone wearing a t-shirt that said, Jesus is my homeboy. He realized that it's within the realm of possibility that Jesus would probably choose his disciples, companions, and followers among the oppressed and the marginalized, much as he did in his first incarnation. In his artist statement, LaChapelle said, "We see many renderings of Jesus and saints throughout art history, but not many reverential examples exist in contemporary art. I approach my work around faith with sincerity and am delighted when a viewer can connect with my intention." So as you can see in this series, Jesus blesses beggars outside of a Chinatown seafood market with loaves of Wonder Bread and fresh fish, reminding viewers of the miracle of the feeding of the multitude. So next we're going to see another photo. Ken, it's the photo of the woman washing his feet. Anointing? Yes, this photo is titled Anointing. So in this image, actually, let's see. I'm sorry, we're going to go to a previous photo, the other one, Ken, I apologize. No, the other one from this series, scroll up a little bit. Not the Last Supper. Keep going up. Okay, maybe I didn't include that one. Okay, well, in any case, there's another image in which Jesus intercedes between police officers and the person they're arresting, which evokes the gospel story of Jesus who prevents a woman caught in the act of adultery being stoned to death. I can find that image later and show people who are interested. But now we're going to go to anointing, Ken. We'll display that image. So in this image, a prostitute washes Jesus's feet, reminding the viewer of the gospel story in which a sinful woman bathes Jesus's feet with her own tears and expensive perfume. And finally, we're going to go to the Last Supper. So in this photograph, this iconic photograph of the Last Supper, Jesus sits in a small, dimly lit apartment with his disciples, many of whom happen to be Black or mixed race men. We can keep that photo up for a moment. Whatever pieces of LaChapelle's art we're looking at, and we only got to see a very, very small sample of it, one of the aspects of it, which is especially impressive, is that it has the potential to earn both the indignation and passion of those who are Christians and those who are not. As I'd mentioned earlier, LaChapelle worked with Andy Warhol in the 1980s, both of whom happened to be gay Catholics, and both of whom had similar views of the world. As culture writer Gillian Chaney has written, quote, "Warhol's religion is undoubtedly more unsteady. LaChapelle's is pious, even if his lack of purity is enough to cause some conservative Christians to clutch at their pearls. What they share is a view of God that's both sacred and strange, connected in large part to participating in a religion that often feels unwelcoming to LGBT people," end quote. Whether you yourself were inspired or outraged by the art we looked at today, I hope that it was a reminder that, as the reading this morning said, life is sacred art, and that you can see the sacred beauty around you in the same way that our greatest artists have.